The women in Turner's life, I ought to have said some of the women in Turner's life, there were quite a lot. So we're going to have a gallop through 4 of the more significant ones. I'm going to start off with Turner's mother. You may have heard the expression that a boy's best friend is his mother. Probably not in Turner's case, she was quite a difficult person. Mary Ann Marshall came from a prosperous family of London butchers and shopkeepers. When old Dad, Turner's father, came to London, we don't know where he met her, but she was 6 years older than him, and they were already well past the age that people got married and had children in the late 18th century. She's described in the documents relating to the household at the time as a housekeeper, which was a polite term for a single woman in her 30s. Her sister and brother had already married and left, so she was very much sort of on the shelf, unfortunately. Turner was born in 1775, and his sister, Mary Ann, in 1778. Now, Mary Ann died just before her 5th birthday in 1783, and that's probably one of the factors that tipped Turner's mother's mental state. What do we know about her? Well, unfortunately, the information that we have is largely from Turner's first biographer, Walter Thornbury. And he says, and this information is based on apparently an unfinished portrait of her that Turner produced, which has disappeared. And he says, the portrait was not wanting in force or decision of touch, but the drawing was defective. There was a strong likeness to Turner about the nose and eyes, her eyes being represented as blue, of a lighter hue than her son's, her nose aquiline, and the nether lip having a slight fall. Her hair was well frizzed, and it was surmounted by a cap with large flappers. Her posture therein was erect, and her aspect masculine, not to say fierce. Now, we don't know what happened to this portrait. Not only that, but Thornbury himself never saw it. So this is one removed from Thornbury himself. But there is a drawing in one of Turner's notebooks that is believed to be his mother. And there it is. And you can see where Turner got his nose from, if this is an accurate drawing of his mother. She suffered from mental illness all her life. She was described as having an ungovernable temper. And she was admitted to St Luke's Hospital for Lunatics in Old Street in 1799, and then she was transferred to the Bethlehem Hospital in Lambeth, Bedlam, which is where she died in 1804, and she's probably buried in a common grave there. So that was Turner's mother. I'm going to move on to one of the lesser known women in his life, and that's his first love, Elizabeth White. In 1787, Turner moved from Brentford down to Margate, and he went to Thomas Coleman's school in Love Lane. And one of his school friends was Edward White, and Elizabeth White was his sister and the same age as Turner. And they became very friendly. Turner visited Margate throughout the early 1790s, and the relationship developed. However, Turner felt that he couldn't make her any offer of marriage because at that time he wasn't earning any money. But he kept in contact with her, and when he went to France, he wrote to her, but it would appear that the letters never arrived. Now, whether it was the postal service or what probably more likely is that her parents didn't think this was a suitable match and probably destroyed the letters. However, when Turner, after the Royal Academy Exhibition of 1796, he felt he'd established himself and he was now in a position to go down and make her an offer. So he did. He went down there, and only to discover that she'd become engaged to a local publican, Richard Wiles, and they married in 1798. Some of the biographers describe him as a builder. He wasn't, he was a publican. I think the confusion is that his parents were also Richard and Elizabeth, and his father was a builder. The newspaper report describes him as of the Bull's Head Inn, which is still there. Turner apparently suffered some form of breakdown. His friends described him sort of having a nervous breakdown at the time. and it's probably one of the reasons why Turner had a very jaundiced view of marriage, and various of his friends refer to that. An interesting sighting, the Bull's Head Hotel is still there, and if you didn't know there was a connection between Turner and Eric Morecambe, this is it. In 1952, Eric Morecambe had his wedding reception there when he married the landlord's daughter, Joan Bartlett, and there's a blue plaque to him. She's buried in the churchyard in St John's in Margate, and it's interesting that I went down there to do some research, and it's very difficult to find, but it is there. And you can see, it was sad because she had a child after the first year of marriage who died within a year, and then she died a year later in 1801. And I'm not sure what it was. It might have been something like cholera was sort of rampant at the time. So quite a sad story. I'm now going to move on to one that you've probably heard of, Sarah Danby, the mother of Turner's children. She was born Sarah Goose in Spilsby in Lincolnshire, and she was christened as a Catholic in Bournemouth. She was brought up in Lambeth as a singer and actress, and she married George Danby, who's described as a glee composer. She had 4 daughters, and they were close neighbours of the Turners in Covent Garden. They lived in Henrietta Street, just round the corner, and then Upper John Street. When she was 2 months pregnant with her last daughter, Danby died in 1798, aged 41, probably of rheumatoid arthritis, which he suffered from all his life. And ironically, he died at the close of a concert which was being held, organised as a benefit by his friends. And just at the moment that the curtain came down, Danby died. Sarah became dependent on a pension from the Royal Society of Musicians. So this is probably one of the reasons why she couldn't live permanently with Turner, because that would mean that she couldn't claim the pension. She did live with him on and off at various addresses. There were 2 daughters, Evelina, born in 1801, and Georgiana in 1811. After Turner's death, she lived in poverty in William Street, Marylebone, with her unmarried daughter Marcella, who was a music teacher. And she was forced to sell various Turner drawings and sketches that he'd given her just to put food on the table. He left her nothing in his will. She moved to George Street near Euston Square, where she died in 1861. The registrar recorded that she was 100 and that she had eaten beefsteak for her dinner the day before she died. Actually, she was 95. They got the dates confused. And she's buried in a common grave in Kensal Green. Now, an interesting footnote to this, some ongoing research that I'm doing. Marcella's sister and her husband brought a court case against Marcella some years later, and I'm still trying to find out the outcome of that. But my supposition is that the other members of the family must have thought that Marcella was hiding some Turner drawings or paintings that her mother had been given, which we know is not the case, because if she had done, she wouldn't have died in abject poverty. So I'm still pursuing that one to find out what that was all about. And then finally, Turner's last love, Sophia Booth. She was born Sophia Caroline Nolte in Dover, and her parents were German, they're German immigrants. She moved to Margate when she married a fisherman, John Henry Pound, in 1818. Sadly, he drowned in 1821. They had 2 sons. One, Joseph, died before he was 6, but Daniel Pound survived. Now, Daniel Pound comes into the story later, and I'll explain. In 1825, she married John Booth. He was 37 years older than her. They had a son, John Pound Booth. He died of cholera in 1832. And then John Booth, the husband, died of cholera in 1833, so she didn't have much luck with her men. And we think that Turner stayed in the Booth guest house from about 1829. Charles Turner, Turner's friend, described her as being like a fat cook with no discernible education. Charming. But Turner's love for her, it was romantic. He wrote her poems and gave her drawings. In 1846 they moved to Davis Place, Cremorne Road, Chelsea, which is now part of Cheney Walk. You can see the house is still there. The house was rented in her name, and Turner, when he visited her and stayed there, was known as Puggy Booth in the area. They assumed that he was her husband, or the Admiral, because he went around in this great naval greatcoat. After Turner's death, Sophia told his friend David Roberts that Turner didn't contribute to the finances of their life together, but he composed various verses in honour of herself and her personal charms, and had been a jealous partner. He said that she was the handmaid of art. Now, interesting sort of afterthought. December 1852, Sophia's son Daniel Pound, he that I mentioned earlier, applied for a passport. His travelling companions were to be his mother and Gustav Philip de Garlieb, a Danish-born engraver who worked at the Ordnance Survey. His address was the same street as Sophia, so we don't know whether he was a neighbour or in fact might have been a lodger. Now, Daniel Pound was also an engraver, so we don't know, where did they go? What were they doing? Like, this is another sort of line I'm pursuing, but shortly after Turner's death, Sophia goes off on a foreign trip with her son and another engraver, so there's something going on there. She became very friendly with Ruskin. She sold him some of Turner's notebooks, and he gave her gifts, including the oval miniature, the early self-portrait of Turner as a boy. Thornbury, the first biographer, describes her as being mercenary, but Ruskin and other friends thought that this was very unfair because she burned Turner's letters rather than sell them. And she gave away many of his other possessions, so there's no evidence that she was in it for the money. Her son, Daniel, sold some of the paintings she had for £4,000 in 1865 and bought Haddenham Hall in Bucks for £1,000, which is where she lived until her death in 1878, aged 80. Now she's also buried in St John's Church, Margate. If you go down there, the gravestone is quite damaged, but you can find it. But what I find very fascinating is that if you stand at Sophia Booth's grave, you look, you can see Elizabeth White's. It's about 12 foot away, so Turner's first and last loves are there together in the churchyard.
Turner's House is a registered charity. For further information, please visit our website at www.turnershouse.org. The website will also provide you further information on how you can support us into the future. Thank you.